Last week I put up a poll in my community tab asking you which Star Wars ranking you wanted. Easily coming out on top was Star Wars Trilogies. So today we're going to stop and rank all three Star Wars trilogies showdown style. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section to share your ranking of all three Star Wars trilogies. As I go into this, I'm going to be using a different style than normal. I actually did this a couple times back in 2018 with the X-Men trilogies and the MCU trilogies, so I'm bringing back an old format. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know down below in the comment section what other types of franchises you want me to do this style with. Here's how this is going to work. We're going to have 6 different rounds where the trilogies are ranked in different ways. In each round, the trilogies gain the number of points for the position it was ranked. First place gets 1 point, third place gets 3 points. The trilogy with the fewest points at the end wins. With that said, let's get started. Round number 1 is going to be the first movies. In third place here is The Phantom Menace. On just a story level, I think that this movie has a much better story and structure than The Force Awakens, but the execution here is pretty abysmal. From just the horrible dialogue, obviously Jar Jar Binks, the extended Senate debates and discussion. This is a movie that was killed by the execution. In second place is The Force Awakens. This movie is just a huge blast of nostalgia. It borrows heavily from A New Hope to give us something familiar, something fun, and on all of those levels, I think it works really nicely. I like the new characters. I like the roller coaster ride that J.J. Abrams took me on. At the same time, there's some pretty big holes inside the story. In their efforts to kind of bring so much back from A New Hope, I think that they made some unwise choices in repeating certain beats. Parts aren't as fresh as they could be, but this is a movie that I think is an absolute blast. But in first place, I think, of course, is A New Hope. The original Star Wars movie was just a groundbreaking film when it came out. Incredible special effects, an amazing world that George Lucas so efficiently brought us into, swept us away with these amazing characters, and just made a classic good versus evil modern fairy tale that is absolutely entertaining over 40 years later. So after the end of round 1, in last place are the prequels, in second place are the sequels, and the original is in first place. Round number 2 is the second movies. In last place is Attack of the Clones. For me, this is the worst movie on this entire list. The story lacks direction and urgency. The dialogue is absolutely abysmal, and the whole movie rests on us buying into a romance that simply does not exist. It's creepy, it's awkward, and it's a movie that goes absolutely nowhere for the entire middle of the film. Second place here is The Last Jedi. This is a frustrating one because I think on just kind of a craftsman level of a coherent movie, I think Rian Johnson provided a solid film here, though it does have some pretty big plot holes, I think, at certain points in time. It's got that weird rabbit trail to the casino, and the decisions that he made with some of the characters made it just seem like he's mad at Star Wars and heroism or something like that. I get he was going for this deconstruction of all of our ideas of the Jedi and heroes, trying to do something different, but at the end of the day, this is just not what I go to a Star Wars movie for. But coming in first place by a landslide is The Empire Strikes Back, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sequel of all time. It just builds off an incredible foundation, digs deeper into the characters, has bigger, larger emotions, and on a technical level, just was able to go light speed ahead of what anything had ever been done before, with some just absolutely stellar action sequences. John Williams' score is even better inside of this film, and it just makes for one of the best films of all time. After round number 2, everybody remains in the same place. Round number 3 is going to be the third movies, and this category I think is one of the most split because all 3 of these movies have people that love them and people that hate them. So as we go into this, this is just kind of my list here. It's not the right list. It's just my list. In third place is The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I enjoyed this movie. I had fun with it. I was actually okay with all the directions they took things, but it is a movie that felt like J.J. Abrams trying to course correct from The Last Jedi, as well as trying to set up his own finale. And so when you get to the finale, none of it has the emotions that it probably should have. It's just rushing through so many plot points so fast. None of it hits the way it should, and it certainly doesn't feel as epic and satisfying as the conclusion to the Skywalker saga should. Runner-up here is going to be Revenge of the Sith. Now, this is a movie that I think has some of the most emotional sequences in all of these films, especially when you get into Order 66 and the betrayal as Obi-Wan realizes what's going on with Anakin. It can really make you feel stuff, and I love the lightsaber duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Now, this is also a movie, though, that I think has some pretty significant plot issues inside of it, in particular in regards to Anakin's turning. I just don't think George Lucas delivered on one of the most important plot points in all of these films. That kind of holds the movie back quite a bit for me. But when it comes to Rise versus Revenge, the reason this one comes out on top is that this one I feel a lot more emotion watching it. But coming in first place is Return of the Jedi. This is a movie that has an absolutely fantastic third act inside of it. I don't even mind the Ewoks. I think the space battle is the best space battle that has ever been put on film. And then when it comes to that throne room scene, there's so much great action, of course, with the lightsaber duel, but more importantly, the drama between father, son, redemption, all of that great stuff. And we get the Emperor in all of his glory and evil inside of it. So this is a movie that I think closes out that original trilogy really nicely. Each of the movies remains in the same position, but the prequels bumped up just a little bit here. Round number 4 is consistency. Here I'm looking at the trilogies as a whole. Do they feel like the pieces fit together and like there was a plan going throughout the entire series, or does it feel kind of like they were making it up as they go along? In third place by quite a bit are the sequels. Now, this is a trilogy that has some great moments inside of it, but the movies themselves don't feel like the pieces fit together at all. It doesn't feel like there was a plan. The payoff inside of Rise of Skywalker doesn't feel like it was set up anywhere in the 2 previous films. I actually read a tweet last week where it said this is one of the strangest trilogies of all time because it feels like each sequel actively dislikes the movie that came before it. And you can just see that in the stuff that JJ set up inside of The Force Awakens. Then in Last Jedi, Rian Johnson goes, nah, that stuff doesn't matter. And then you get to Rise of Skywalker, and there's another huge left turn. The Emperor is suddenly back, and all that stuff that Rian Johnson said didn't matter suddenly matters even more so than it did. So this is a trilogy that feels like there was no roadmap. Kathleen Kennedy wasn't kind of like pulling the pieces together. They just made the movies up as they were going along, and then course corrected when it seemed like the audience on the internet didn't seem to care all that much for The Last Jedi. So there is no consistency here. Our runner-up on this one is going to actually be the original trilogy. Maybe this is a controversial placement, but there's obviously a number of things here where clearly George was making things up as he goes along. He had ideas about the backstory of these characters, but at the same time, he had Luke and Leia have a romantic embrace in Empire Strikes Back and then their brother and sister in the next movie. There's a number of things that I think fit together really nicely, weave throughout it, but it's well documented that the 2 big reveals, Luke's father is Anakin Skywalker and Leia is his sister, he came up with those decisions pretty late in the process. It's documented that a script of Empire had been written by someone else, and then George came in and added in that Vader was the father. And so as much as I think they really do work together as a whole, love the original trilogy, there was a lot of stuff that he was making up as he goes along, and it felt like, even bringing back a second Death Star and things like that, he didn't have as much of a master plan as he's claimed in a number of interviews. But in first place, I think is actually the prequels. The ideas set up in The Phantom Menace are the ideas that are paid off in Revenge of the Sith. Anakin has issues with fear. Palpatine is this mastermind tweaking things behind the scenes. There is reason for the Jedi to be suspicious about Anakin. You move into the second film and it builds on that a little bit where Anakin's mother ends up getting killed, and so it creates this fear inside of him, and then you get to the third film. That fear is what ends up being his motivation for the turn. Once again, I have issues with the exact execution of all those plot points, but it's consistent. This is the one where George, at kind of peak George's amount of power and amount of time to do whatever he wanted, had an idea where he wanted to take things. His execution of his plan on where he wanted to take things issues with it, like we mentioned before in the previous section, but I think this one is the one that has the most consistent tone, most consistent issues, and a clear stream from beginning of it to end, where he started, where he was taking things. You know exactly what all of it was about, and I think there's a lot of consistency inside of the prequels, whether you love or hate them. So after round number 4, the originals stay in first place, but the prequels have moved into second place, and just slightly behind them are the sequels. Round number 5 is going to be the Rotten Tomatoes score. If you don't know how Rotten Tomatoes works, it's an aggregate of hundreds of movie critics. So this is essentially the aggregated ranking from movie critics over the years. In third place, the average Rotten Tomatoes score for the prequels was only 66%. Our runner-up here is the sequels. Average Rotten Tomatoes score was 80.33%, but in first place is going to be the original trilogy with an average Rotten Tomatoes score of 89.6 repeating percent. So pretty distinct scores here, that the prequels were in last by the opinion of the critics, and the originals were in first place. Put these scores together, the original remains in first place, where it has stuck this entire time, but tied in second place or last place is both the sequels and the prequels. And finally, with round number 6, you get to break the tie. Yesterday, I put up a poll asking which is the worst Star Wars trilogy. Easily in last place, it was the prequels, with 60% of the vote saying they are the worst. Then with 36% of the vote was the sequels. And finally, with some math that doesn't quite add up, the originals only had 3% of the vote. When you add all the scores together, our final tally here is that the prequels come in last place with 15 points. The sequels are in second place with 14 points, but with a dominant lead, coming in first is the original trilogy, as many of you probably predicted would happen here. Be sure to tell me what you thought down below in the comment section. Was the scoring right? Was I off somewhere in the mix? Also, if you want more of these showdowns, I got 2 more right over there in that playlist. Also, I'll be doing a number of other Star Wars rankings over the next week or two. You can check that out right down there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.